The air crackled with tension as the sun dipped toward the horizon on September 11, 1297. The Battle of Stirling Bridge loomed before William Wallace, a pivotal moment that would etch his name into the annals of history. His heart raced, each beat resonating with the cries of his compatriots rallying around him. Before him, the English army spread across the fields, a formidable force led by the seasoned Earl of Surrey, their banners fluttering ominously in the wind. They outnumbered his men nearly 5-1, a daunting sight for any leader. Yet, Wallace stood resolute, a figure of defiance, his eyes ablaze with the fire of freedom. With a swift motion, he signaled his men to advance. The narrow stone bridge, their only means of escape should the tide turn against them, became the fulcrum of his daring strategy. "We fight for our land, and we fight for our kin," he bellowed, his voice cutting through the clamour of swords and shields. The Scots surged forward, their battle cries echoing across the landscape, a rallying call that resonated with centuries of oppression. As the first wave of English soldiers crossed the bridge, Wallace's forces lay hidden, biding their time like coiled serpents. The enemy, confident in their numbers, advanced without caution. At that crucial moment, Wallace unleashed his men, a torrent of fury and desperation. With a fierce cry, they charged, the sound of their boots pounding against the wooden planks of the bridge, mingling with the clash of metal. The English, caught off guard, struggled to regroup as the Scots poured onto the bridge, pushing their foes backward into the icy waters of the River Forth below. The cries of the drowning men mingled with the battle's roar, a cacophony of chaos that filled the air. In that fleeting moment, Wallace transformed from a mere rebel into a symbol of resistance. His victory over the English, a testament to the indomitable spirit of his people. But to understand how we got here, in the late 13th century, Scotland was a land of stark contrasts and simmering tensions. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the sounds of a society grappling with its identity. William Wallace was born around 1270 in the small village of Elderslie, Renfrewshire, to a family of lesser nobility. His father, Malcolm Wallace, had been a landowner with ties to the Scottish nobility, but the family's fortunes were modest, a reflection of the turbulent times they lived in. The English crown, under King Edward I, sought to consolidate its power over Scotland, treating its people with increasing disdain and imposing heavy taxes and strict laws. As a boy, Wallace likely heard the tales of resistance from his father and neighbours, stories of the ancient kings who once united the clans against invaders. These narratives were not mere folklore, they were woven into the very fabric of Scottish identity. By the time he reached adolescence, tensions had crescendoed into an open conflict. The death of Alexander III in 1286 left Scotland without a clear heir, plunging the country into a power vacuum that would soon attract the predatory ambitions of the English. Edward I, known as Longshanks, was a king who relished conquest. He viewed Scotland as a prize to be claimed, and in 1290 he sought to impose his rule through the Treaty of Brigham, which would have effectively made Scotland a vassal of England. The Scots, however, were not willing to yield. The sense of betrayal hung heavy in the air, brewing resentment among the clans. The Scottish nobility found themselves at a crossroads, torn between loyalty to their country and the allure of English power. Wallace's early life was marked by the struggle for identity, a struggle mirrored in the hearts of his countrymen. The oppressive laws imposed by Edward's regime stoked the fires of rebellion. It was during this time that Wallace forged a bond with Sir Andrew Moray, a fellow nobleman from the north. Their friendship was rooted in a shared vision of freedom for Scotland and a belief that the heavy hand of English rule could be challenged. Moray's fiery spirit and military acumen complemented Wallace's strategic mind, creating a formidable partnership. The spark that ignited Wallace's rebellion came in 1297, following the brutal execution of Moray. Captured during a skirmish, Moray faced the wrath of the English crown, and his death marked a pivotal moment for Wallace. It was said that Wallace was consumed by a thirst for vengeance, a drive that would lead him to rally the Scots to his cause. He began gathering a following, his charisma and determination attracting men from all walks of life. Farmers, tradesmen, and even disillusioned nobles joined him, their hearts united by a singular desire to reclaim their homeland from the clutches of tyranny. The landscape of Scotland, with its rugged mountains and winding rivers, became a backdrop for their burgeoning resistance. The smell of heather and the sound of rustling leaves served as a reminder of the land they fought for. In the summer of 1297, Wallace and his men launched a series of guerrilla attacks against English garrisons, disrupting supply lines and striking fear into the hearts of their oppressors. They were outnumbered, but fueled by a fierce sense of purpose. The cries of freedom rang out across the hills, a clarion call to anyone who dared to hope for a Scotland free from English domination. As the summer wore on, word of Wallace's exploits spread. His reputation grew, and so did the urgency of his mission. He was not merely a man of action, he was also a symbol of resistance, embodying the hopes and dreams of his people. The vision of a free Scotland began to take shape in the minds of his followers. They imagined a land where they could govern themselves, free from the yoke of English oppression. But the path ahead was fraught with peril. By September 11th, 1297, the stage was set for a confrontation that would change the course of Scottish history. The Scots, led by Wallace, faced off against the English forces at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. They were outnumbered 5-1, but the strategic use of the narrow bridge allowed them to turn the tide. The English, overconfident and unprepared for the brilliance of Wallace's tactics, found themselves trapped. The clash of steel and the cries of battle echoed through the valley as the Scots fought with a desperation born of their desire for freedom. Behind this epic struggle lay the lives of ordinary men and women. Families were torn apart, farms abandoned as sons and fathers took up arms. The price of resistance was steep, and the spectre of death loomed large. The death toll at Stirling was significant, with estimates suggesting that hundreds of English soldiers fell, while the Scots, though victorious, also suffered losses. Yet, in victory, Wallace became the Guardian of Scotland, a title that carried with it both honour and heavy responsibility. The aftermath of the battle saw Wallace celebrated as a hero. The fires of rebellion burned brighter, igniting a fervour for independence that swept through the Scottish Highlands and Lowlands alike. But with recognition came scrutiny. The English crown would not sit idly by, and Edward I's resolve to crush the rebellion hardened. The cracks of dissent among the Scottish nobles began to widen, and the fragile coalition that had formed under Wallace's leadership faced the threat of fracture. As the autumn leaves began to fall, Wallace stood at the precipice of his destiny, a man burdened by the weight of expectation and the reality of conflict. He was propelled by a sense of duty to his people, yet the spectre of betrayal loomed on the horizon. In the stillness of the night, he could hear the whispers of the past, tales of heroes and villains long gone, and he understood that the struggle for Scotland was only just beginning. The world was changing around him, and the choices he would make in the coming months would echo through history, shaping not only his own fate, but that of his beloved Scotland. He was not just a man. He was a living embodiment of a nation's dreams and aspirations, a warrior for freedom, in a time when the very idea of liberty hung by a thread. And as the winds of change began to blow, Wallace prepared to face the challenges ahead, ready to fight not just for his own survival, but for the soul of a nation. In the summer of 1297, as the last embers of the sun dipped behind the hills of Scotland, a flame of rebellion flickered to life. William Wallace, once a lesser-known figure in Elderslie, began to coalesce a movement that would ignite the hearts of countless Scots. This was not merely a fight for land or title. It was a struggle for identity, a battle against the suffocating grip of King Edward I, whose iron fist had cast a long shadow over the Highlands. The echoes of Sir Andrew Moray's execution still rang in their ears, fueling their resolve. Wallace's charisma drew men and women alike to his cause. By late summer, he had gathered a force of around 3,000 men, farmers, tradesmen, and even some disillusioned nobles, all united by a shared yearning for freedom. The very air thrummed with anticipation as they trained in the fields, their voices rising in defiance against tyranny. The Battle of Stirling Bridge had transformed him into a leader, a symbol of hope against overwhelming odds. On September 11, 1297, the Scots faced the English army, a fearsome force numbering over 15,000, led by the Earl of Surrey. The odds were daunting, 5 Scots for every Englishman. Yet Wallace understood the terrain. The narrow bridge spanning the River Forth would be their ally. As the English forces advanced, Wallace's tactics shone through. With precision, he ordered his men to hold their ground, allowing only a small number of English soldiers to cross at a time. The clash was brutal. The sound of steel meeting steel reverberated through the valley like thunder. The Scots, fueled by adrenaline and the dream of independence, fought with a ferocity born from desperation. As the English soldiers struggled to maintain their formation on the narrow bridge, Wallace's men surged forward, turning the tide of battle. By the end of the day, the English lay decimated, their losses estimated at nearly 5,000. This triumph was not just a victory in battle, it was a statement, a proclamation that Scotland would not bow to oppression. In the aftermath, Wallace's reputation soared. He was proclaimed Guardian of Scotland, a title that carried immense weight and responsibility. But with power came peril. The English crown, enraged by this humiliating defeat, vowed retribution. King Edward I, known as Longshanks, was not a ruler to be trifled with. The very air crackled with tension. Whispers of betrayal began to circulate even among those who had sworn loyalty to Wallace. As the autumn wore on, Wallace sought to consolidate his power, navigating the treacherous waters of Scottish politics. He entered into alliances with various clans, each with their own ambitions and grievances. The MacGregors, the Campbells, and the Frasers all had their own stakes in the game. Wallace understood that unity was crucial, yet mistrust lingered like a fog. The scars of previous conflicts still affected their decisions, and many feared that Wallace's growing influence might eclipse their own. The winter months brought harsh conditions, yet the spirit of rebellion only intensified. The Scots faced not only the threat of English forces, but also the brutal realities of Scottish winters. Food scarcity became pronounced, the harvest had been poor, and many found themselves on the brink of starvation. The sound of empty stomachs echoed through the camps, and Wallace, feeling the weight of his men's struggles, sought to bolster their resolve. "Freedom is not won without sacrifice," he would say, his voice steady and deep, instilling in them the belief that their fight was righteous. In the flickering light of campfires, they shared stories of their ancestors, of battles fought for honor and pride, igniting a fierce determination to reclaim their land. By early 1298, Wallace had secured his position further, but the challenges were mounting. The English were regrouping, led by the relentless Edward, who was determined to crush the rebellion once and for all. In February, a new English force, bolstered by experienced longbowmen, began to march toward Scotland. The tension was palpable. Wallace knew a confrontation was inevitable. In the spring, whispers of English mobilization reached Wallace. The air held a heavy anticipation, a sense of foreboding mingling with the hope that had ignited the rebellion. The Battle of Falkirk loomed like a dark cloud. Wallace, aware of the stakes, sought to prepare his men, but doubt crept into their hearts. Would they be able to repeat their previous triumph, or would they face doom? The day of battle arrived on July 22nd, 1298. The Scots took their positions, and as they looked across the field, they saw the English army arrayed before them, a sea of armor and determination. The cries of battle formed a cacophony that drowned out the whispers of fear. Wallace, wearing a simple tunic, stood tall, his presence commanding. "Today, we fight not just for ourselves, but for our children, for our future," he shouted, rallying his men. Yet, the tide of battle would not favor them. The English, armed with longbows that could pierce armor from a distance, unleashed a rain of arrows that decimated the Scots before they could close ranks. The sounds of men screaming, horses whinnying, and the clash of swords filled the air as chaos erupted. The Scots, despite their bravery, struggled to maintain their formation in the face of such overwhelming firepower. By the end of the day, the battlefield lay littered with the fallen. Wallace's forces suffered heavy losses, estimated at over 2,000 men. The once unyielding spirit of rebellion was bruised. Wallace himself fought valiantly, but the defeat shattered morale. The dream of a free Scotland felt distant, slipping through their fingers like grains of sand. In the aftermath, Wallace retreated into the shadows, adopting guerrilla tactics. He harassed English supply lines, striking swiftly, only to vanish into the Scottish landscape, a phantom of resistance. Yet, the betrayal was brewing. Among those he had once trusted, doubt began to fester. The whispers of dissent grew louder, echoing through the glens and valleys. The once unified front began to crack. As the year progressed, the sense of impending doom loomed larger. Wallace's leadership was questioned, and the spectre of betrayal hovered ever closer. His rise had been meteoric, but now the darkness threatened to eclipse the light of his cause. The hopes of a nation rested on the shoulders of a man who had dared to dream of freedom. And yet, in the heart of Scotland, the spirit that Wallace had ignited refused to be extinguished. For as long as the wind blew across the hills, carrying the whispers of freedom, there remained a flicker of hope, a belief that one day the sacrifice of those who had fought would not be in vain. In the spring of 1298, the air was thick with uncertainty. Wallace, having tasted the sweet nectar of victory at Stirling Bridge, now faced the bitter reality of continued conflict. His triumph had awakened a fierce spirit in Scotland, but it also drew the ire of King Edward I, who was determined to quash this rebellion with a vengeance. The English monarch, known as Longshanks for his towering stature, assembled a formidable army of approximately 20,000 men, bolstered by the longbowmen whose deadly accuracy had proven decisive in previous campaigns. On the other hand, Wallace could count on fewer than 10,000 Scots, a motley band that included seasoned fighters and enthusiastic peasants, all willing to risk their lives for the promise of freedom. The tension crackled like a storm on the horizon. On July 22, 1298, the two armies met at Falkirk, a sight that would soon become synonymous with tragedy for the Scots. The battlefield unfurled across grassy plains, dotted with hedgerows and the distant echo of the River Carron. Wallace, aware of the strategic mistakes that had marred earlier battles, sought to employ guerrilla tactics. He envisioned a chaotic engagement that would allow his men to strike swiftly and retreat before the English could regroup. But the reality proved far more complicated. As the sun rose on that fateful day, the sounds of war echoed through the valley. The rustle of armor, the clash of weapons, and the cries of men filled the air. Wallace stood tall, his heart pounding with the weight of his people's hopes. Yet, even as he inspired his men with a stirring speech, he could feel the spectre of doubt creeping in. The English forces were larger, better equipped, and their formations were tight. They advanced with the confidence of a well-oiled machine, driven by the promise of crushing the Scots once and for all. The battle commenced with an initial Scottish assault, a surge of energy as Wallace's men charged forward. The bravery of their advance was palpable. The Scots fought with a ferocity born of desperation. But the English longbowmen, positioned on the flanks, unleashed a hail of arrows that decimated the Scottish ranks. The air filled with the sickening thud of arrows finding their marks, and screams of pain mingled with the sound of battle. As they fell, the Scots struggled against the tide of arrows, their advance faltering under the relentless assault. By midday, the tide had turned. The Scots, once united in purpose, began to splinter. Confusion set in as panic spread through the ranks. Wallace, witnessing the chaos unfold, fought valiantly to rally his men. "Stand firm," he shouted, his voice cutting through the din. Yet, despite his efforts, the weight of the English numbers began to crush the Scottish resolve. It was as if the ground itself was swallowing them whole. The sun bore down, relentless, as if mocking their plight. When the dust settled, the aftermath was catastrophic. The Scots suffered heavy losses, with estimates suggesting around 5,000 men slain, while English casualties numbered approximately 2,000. The stench of blood and sweat lingered in the air, mingling with the cries of the wounded. Wallace himself narrowly escaped, but the defeat was a staggering blow to both his cause and his spirit. The dreams of a free Scotland seemed to slip through his fingers like sand. In the days that followed, the landscape of Scotland shifted dramatically. Wallace's position as guardian was now under severe threat. The disillusionment among the Scots deepened as they grappled with the grim reality of their defeat. Many questioned their leader's strategies. whispering among themselves in taverns and villages about the wisdom of continuing the fight. Wallace, acutely aware of the growing dissent, retreated to the highlands, where the rugged terrain offered both refuge and a chance to regroup. Meanwhile, King Edward I seized the opportunity to tighten his grip on Scotland, sending his forces to consolidate control over the territories. The English crown imposed heavy taxes and laws that further stoked the flames of resentment among the Scots. It was a calculated move, one meant to break their spirit and ensure that any flicker of rebellion would be extinguished. Wallace, however, was not ready to yield. The defeat at Falkirk had ignited a fierce resolve within him. He knew he must adapt to the changing tides, embracing guerrilla warfare as his primary tactic. With the support of loyal followers, Wallace began to orchestrate raids on English supply lines. Under the cover of darkness, they struck swiftly, leaving destruction in their wake before disappearing into the shadows of the Highlands. The English forces, accustomed to conventional warfare, struggled to adapt to this new, elusive foe. Wallace's name began to circulate again, whispered with reverence and fear, a ghost that haunted the English soldiers as they marched through the Scottish landscape. Yet, the price of resistance was steep. The toll on the Scottish people grew heavier with each passing day. Villages were burned to the ground in retaliation for raids, and families were torn apart. The English sought to root out Wallace and his supporters, employing brutal tactics that left scars on the land and its people. The cries of the innocent echoed in the hearts of those who had once rallied for freedom, and the lines between friend and foe blurred. It was a dark hour for Scotland, but in the midst of despair, sparks of rebellion continued to flicker. Wallace's defiance was infectious, igniting a passion among the Scots that had been dormant after the crushing loss at Falkirk. They began to rally again, driven by a visceral need for autonomy. A new wave of volunteers swelled the ranks of those who would fight, driven by stories of Wallace's courage and the hope that freedom might still be within reach. As the autumn leaves began to fall in 1298, Wallace knew that the fight was far from over. The spirit of resistance would not be extinguished. He resolved to continue his campaign, not just for himself, but for every Scot who yearned for the taste of freedom. The stakes were higher than ever, and with each passing day, the shadow of betrayal loomed larger. In the heart of this turmoil, Wallace clung to the belief that a united Scotland could rise again, despite the heavy cost of their struggle. The fires of hope flickered dimly, but they burned nonetheless, a testament to the indomitable spirit of a people unwilling to surrender. As the summer sun cast long shadows over the Scottish hills in July 1298, the air thickened with anticipation and dread. The Scots, numbering fewer than 10,000, stood poised to confront an English army swelling to nearly 20,000, commanded by a vengeful King Edward I. This moment, the Battle of Falkirk, would alter the course of Scotland's struggle for independence. The muddy fields near the River Carron were a tableau of chaos, steeped in the clash of steel and the cries of men, where valour would collide with despair. William Wallace, the Guardian of Scotland, felt the weight of expectation heavy upon his shoulders. His triumph at Stirling Bridge had ignited a flame of rebellion, drawing many to his cause, yet now the spectre of defeat loomed ominously. The Scots, emboldened by their previous victory, had gathered under his banner, but as they faced the well-trained English forces, the reality of the situation began to sink in. The sharp twang of English longbows was a prelude to the slaughter that awaited. Within moments, the air would be filled with the stench of sweat and blood, mingling with the cries of the wounded. The initial clash was fierce, a cacophony of battle that echoed across the landscape. The Scots engaged with bravery, charging against the English lines. Yet, as the arrows rained down, a deadly storm that could pierce armour and flesh alike, hope began to falter. Wallace rallied his men, shouting commands above the din, urging them to hold the line, to fight for their homeland. But chaos breeds fear, and the Scots, once united, found themselves fragmented in the face of overwhelming odds. In this decisive moment, Wallace saw the tide turn. The longbowmen, under the command of Sir Henry de Bohun, unleashed a relentless barrage, crippling the Scottish advance. The English cavalry, a force of disciplined knights, surged forward, breaking through the Scottish ranks with terrifying ease. In the heart of the fray, Wallace fought valiantly, his sword flashing as he struck down foes, yet his spirit waned as he witnessed the disarray around him. The Scots fell back, their formation crumbling, and in that instant, he understood the battle was lost. The aftermath of Falkirk was catastrophic. The Scottish forces, once a budding symbol of hope, were scattered and demoralised. Wallace, who had inspired many with his courage, now faced the bitter reality of betrayal and loss. The English forces, revelling in their victory, exacted a cruel toll. Historical accounts suggest that nearly 5,000 Scots lay dead in the aftermath, while the English suffered significantly fewer losses. The fields that had borne witness to brave hearts now bore the scars of defeat and despair. As the smoke cleared, Wallace's heart heavy with grief, he understood that the fight had evolved. He could no longer lead an army in open battle. The landscape of resistance would shift to a different kind of warfare. He and his followers would take to the shadows, employing guerrilla tactics that would harass the English forces, disrupting their supply lines and striking when least expected. In these darkened woods and hidden valleys, a new chapter would unfold, a fight not for glory on the battlefield, but for survival and endurance. Meanwhile, the English crown, emboldened by their victory, tightened their grip on Scotland. King Edward I proclaimed himself the rightful ruler, issuing harsh edicts that stifled any remaining whispers of rebellion. Yet, the death of Sir Andrew Moray, Wallace's compatriot and fellow leader, had sparked a fire within the hearts of those who dared to dream of freedom. Moray's execution by the English had not extinguished the spirit of resistance. It had only intensified it. Across the hills and valleys, men whispered Wallace's name, and tales of his defiance ignited a flicker of hope among the oppressed. In the years that followed, Wallace became a spectre, an elusive figure haunting the English forces, appearing and disappearing like a wraith. His exploits grew into legend, with each tale told around the flickering fires of Scottish homes, where the warmth of camaraderie mingled with the chill of oppression. The common folk, labourers and farmers, saw in Wallace not just a man, but a symbol of their struggle, a beacon lighting the path toward independence. The English, however, were relentless. In 1305, the whispers of Wallace's defiance drew the ire of those who once called him a compatriot. Betrayed by John de Menteith, a Scottish knight with ambitions of his own, Wallace was captured and taken to London. The streets of the capital buzzed with anticipation as the once mighty guardian of Scotland was paraded through the city, shackled and humiliated. The trial that followed was a farce, a spectacle meant to reinforce English supremacy. "I cannot be a traitor to my own country," Wallace declared defiantly, his voice echoing in the stone chamber where he faced his accusers. His refusal to bend to the crown's demands only solidified his status as a martyr. On August 23, 1305, the execution was brutal, hanging, drawing, and quartering, a punishment meant to instill fear. Yet instead, it ignited a passion for freedom among the Scots, turning Wallace into an enduring symbol of resistance. Though he was gone, his legacy endured, woven into the very fabric of Scotland's identity. The Wallace Monument, a towering structure near Stirling, stands as a testament to his sacrifice and the dream he inspired. Each stone tells a story of courage, defiance, and the enduring quest for freedom, a narrative that would echo through generations. As the years turned, the memory of William Wallace transformed from that of a man to an idea, a dream of independence that refused to die, taking root in the hearts of those who dared to remember. The spirit of rebellion, once flickering like a candle in the dark, began to blaze anew. And in that flame, the hopes of a nation found their voice, reawakening the fight for liberty that Wallace had so fiercely championed. In the aftermath of the devastating Battle of Falkirk on July 22, 1298, the landscape of Scotland lay scarred, both physically and emotionally. The defeat had shattered the dreams of independence for many, leaving behind not only a battlefield littered with the bodies of the fallen, but also a populace grappling with the harsh reality of loss. The Scots had suffered roughly 5,000 casualties, a staggering number that reverberated through the villages and towns, casting a shadow over the hopes of a united Scotland. Families were torn apart, and the once vibrant communities found themselves enveloped in an atmosphere of mourning and despair. William Wallace, once the beacon of hope, was now a figure shrouded in uncertainty. His forces, reduced to a fragmented remnant of their former strength, retreated into the rugged hills and glens of Scotland. The cries of the wounded and dying echoed in his mind, haunting him as he navigated the treacherous path ahead. The taste of defeat was bitter, a stark contrast to the sweet victory at Stirling Bridge. The visions of unity and freedom began to wane, leaving only the remnants of a fractured army and a resolute leader who still believed in the cause. In the weeks that followed, the Scots faced not only the physical toll of battle, but also the psychological scars that would take much longer to heal. The English, emboldened by their victory, pressed their advantage, seeking to crush any remaining spirit of rebellion. King Edward I, known as Longshanks, saw this as an opportunity to solidify his control. He dispatched forces to reclaim lost territories and quell any dissent. The English crown's heavy-handed governance intensified, imposing further taxation and restrictions on the beleaguered Scots. The once proud clansmen, who had fought valiantly for their homeland, now felt the weight of oppression bearing down upon them. Amidst the despair, whispers of rebellion still lingered in the air. The memory of Wallace's bravery ignited a flicker of resistance among those who had survived the battle. In the taverns and hidden corners of towns, men and women spoke of their fallen comrades, recounting tales of valor and sacrifice. They mourned not only for the dead, but for the ideals that had drawn them into the struggle: freedom, dignity, and a future unshackled from the yoke of English rule. The memory of Sir Andrew Moray, executed just months before the battle, served as a poignant reminder of the costs of their fight. His name became synonymous with sacrifice and courage, and it fueled the desire for vengeance against the oppressor. In the quiet of the Scottish hills, Wallace gathered what remained of his loyal followers. The air was filled with the scent of damp earth and the faint sound of rustling leaves, a stark contrast to the chaos of battle. Each man who stood with him had lost friends, family, and their sense of security. The faces of the survivors bore the marks of grief and determination. Wallace addressed them with a voice that resonated with both sorrow and resolve. Though we have faced a great defeat, we shall not be broken. The spirit of Scotland lives on in each of you. His words ignited a spark, reminding them of their shared purpose. They may have lost a battle, but the war for their homeland was far from over. As autumn approached, the reality of survival set in. The harshness of the Scottish winter loomed, and the remnants of Wallace's forces needed to regroup and adapt. They turned to guerrilla tactics, leveraging the landscape to their advantage. The hills and forests, once merely a backdrop to their struggle, became their refuge and their weapon. Small bands of Scots harassed English supply lines, intercepting supplies meant for the occupying forces. Each skirmish was a reminder that they could still strike against the enemy, that hope was not entirely lost. Word of Wallace's resilience spread, drawing new recruits from across Scotland. Men, women, and even children, inspired by his unwavering spirit, began to take up arms. The struggle transformed into a grassroots movement where the ideals of freedom and self-determination took root in the hearts of the people. They were no longer merely fighting for Wallace, but for their own future. The English, sensing a resurgence of defiance, grew increasingly anxious. The Scots, in their scattered bands, became a thorn in Longshanks' side, and the English soldiers found themselves stretched thin, struggling to maintain control over a land that was slowly awakening to the idea of independence. The winter that followed was brutal. The cold winds howled through the valleys, and the snow blanketed the land, creating a harsh landscape that mirrored the struggle within the hearts of the Scots. Faced with hunger and hardship, the people drew strength from their shared suffering. In hidden gatherings, they spoke of Wallace and the sacrifices they had made. The stories of those who had fallen grew into legends, and the desire for vengeance against the English became a rallying cry. Each tale whispered in the dark corners of their homes fueled the fire of rebellion that burned deep within them. As the months passed, Wallace's reputation grew, transforming him into a symbol of resistance. The story of his trial and execution became a rallying point for the Scots, who now viewed him as a martyr for their cause. In 1305, when he was captured and taken to London, his defiance in the face of death only solidified his status. "I cannot be a traitor to my own country," he had declared, his words echoing in the hearts of those who remained steadfast in their fight for freedom. The brutal nature of his execution, hanging, drawing, and quartering, served to galvanize the Scottish people, turning their grief into a renewed commitment to the struggle. In the spring of 1306, as the first blooms began to appear after the harsh winter, a new sense of purpose emerged among the Scots. The tide of their struggle began to shift once more. Wallace's legacy, forged in the fires of battle and tempered by sacrifice, became the cornerstone of a growing movement. The scars of the past would not be forgotten, but they would serve as a reminder of the resilience of the Scottish spirit. The fight for independence was far from over, and the people rallied behind the enduring symbol of their struggle, a man who had dared to dream of freedom, a man who had fought for their right to exist as a nation. As the sun set over the hills of Scotland, the voices of the people rose in unison, a haunting yet hopeful melody echoing through the valleys. They would remember their fallen, honor their sacrifices, and continue to fight for a future where they could stand as a free people. The memory of William Wallace would live on, a flame of hope that refused to be extinguished, illuminating the path toward their destiny. William Wallace's death in 1305 marked not just the end of a life, but the birth of a legend that would reverberate through centuries. Executed in a gruesome spectacle in London, his final words, "I cannot be a traitor to my own country," echoed far beyond the physical realm of his existence, igniting a flame of resistance that would inspire generations. His martyrdom, rendered in vivid detail by chroniclers of the time, transformed him into a symbol of defiance against oppression, a figure whose very name became synonymous with the struggle for freedom. In the years following his execution, Wallace's tale was woven into the fabric of Scottish nationalism. The wars of Scottish independence, which he so passionately fought for, continued long after his death. The defeat at Falkirk and the subsequent betrayal by some of his countrymen had not extinguished the desire for autonomy. Instead, they fueled the resolve of others, like Robert the Bruce, who would rise to carry the torch of independence. The Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, where Bruce's forces defeated the English, would be seen as a direct continuation of Wallace's legacy. It was there that the Scots, inspired by Wallace's spirit of resistance, would secure a pivotal victory, reclaiming a sense of identity and agency. The process of remembering Wallace was not without distortion. In the centuries that followed, his story was romanticized and mythologized, often overshadowing the harsh realities of his struggle. Poets and writers from the late medieval period into the Romantic era would embellish his exploits, casting him as a noble hero fighting against tyranny. The 15th century poet Blind Harry penned the Actes and Dedis of Sir William Wallace, a narrative that would shape popular perceptions of Wallace, depicting him as a larger-than-life figure, an archetype of chivalry. This work, though riddled with inaccuracies, would become a primary source for those seeking to understand Wallace's life and the ethos of Scottish resistance. By the 18th century, Wallace had transformed into a national icon, a symbol of Scottish pride in the face of adversity. The Jacobite uprisings of 1715 and 1745 drew upon his legacy, as rebels invoked his name to rally support against English rule. Statues began to rise in his honour, most notably the Wallace Monument near Stirling, completed in 1869. This towering structure, a tribute to his memory, stands on the very land where he achieved his greatest victory. It serves as a reminder of the bloodshed and sacrifice that characterized the Scottish struggle for independence. Yet, with this glorification came a certain disconnection from the historical reality of Wallace's fight. The complexities of his life, his guerrilla tactics, the hardships faced by common Scots, and the brutal conditions of war were often simplified into a narrative of good versus evil. The romanticized image of the noble warrior obscured the grim realities of a people torn apart by conflict. In the popular imagination, Wallace became an emblem of unyielding bravery, as his life distilled into a series of heroic tales, while the sacrifices of his contemporaries faded into obscurity. In the 20th century, Wallace's legacy took on new dimensions, particularly with the release of the film Braveheart in 1995. The portrayal of Wallace, played by Mel Gibson, reintroduced him to a global audience, though it was marked by historical inaccuracies and dramatizations that further mythologized his story. The film emphasized themes of freedom and sacrifice, capturing the imagination of millions. Yet it also sparked debates about the authenticity of historical representation, as viewers grappled with the distinction between fact and fiction. Braveheart reignited interest in Scotland's past and its quest for independence, particularly in the context of the late 20th and early 21st centuries, as movements for devolution and independence gained traction. The Scottish Parliament was re-established in 1999, symbolising a renewed sense of national identity. Wallace's legacy became a rallying point for those advocating for autonomy, with his story serving as a potent reminder of the struggles endured for the sake of self-determination. Despite the mythologization, the essence of Wallace's fight remains relevant. His life and death illustrated the cost of freedom, the sacrifices made in the name of independence, and the enduring spirit of resistance against tyranny. In modern Scotland, Wallace is commemorated not just as a historical figure, but as an emblem of the aspirations of a nation. His image can be found in schools, on coins, and in public memorials, a testament to the impact he has had on the Scottish psyche. Yet as we honour his legacy, we must also acknowledge the complexities and the darker aspects of the fight for freedom. The struggle for Scottish identity was marred by violence, betrayal, and loss. The desire for independence came at a high cost, leading to bloodshed and suffering for many. The stories of those who stood with Wallace, the families torn apart by war, and the villages ravaged by conflict deserve recognition alongside his. Their sacrifices, though less celebrated, form an integral part of the narrative of resistance. As we reflect on Wallace's life, we must also consider what it teaches us about the nature of power and the human spirit. His story is a reminder that the quest for freedom often entails tremendous sacrifice, not just from leaders like Wallace, but from countless individuals who dare to stand against oppression. It compels us to honour the past while recognising the ongoing struggles for justice and autonomy across the world. In this way, Wallace's legacy transcends time and geography. It serves as a beacon for all who fight against injustice, a call to remember that the desire for freedom is a universal human aspiration. The echoes of his defiance continue to inspire, urging us to reflect on the values of courage and resilience. His life may have ended, but his spirit endures, a reminder that the fight for liberty is never truly over, and that the struggle for identity and sovereignty remains as vital today as it was in the tumultuous 13th century. The tale of William Wallace stands as a profound reflection on the complexities of human nature: ambition, love, power, and the relentless pursuit of freedom. In an age where the aspirations of one man could ignite the flames of rebellion, Wallace's journey reveals not just the heroic spirit of resistance, but also the tragic weight of betrayal that often accompanies such fervour. Born into a world fraught with oppression, Wallace's desire for autonomy transformed him from a humble lesser noble into a national icon, stirring the hearts of countless Scots. Yet, ambition can be a double-edged sword. It propels one forward, but can also lead to isolation, as Wallace found himself ultimately betrayed by those who once rallied to his cause. Consider the loyalty that exists between friends and comrades. Wallace's bond with Sir Andrew Moray, forged in the fires of conflict, was a testament to the power of shared purpose. Their shared vision of an independent Scotland galvanised a movement that transcended social boundaries. However, when the tides of war turned against them, loyalty became a scarce currency, and betrayal became a bitter reality. Wallace's last words in the face of execution, "I cannot be a traitor to my own country," echo through history as a chilling reminder that the struggle for freedom often requires a profound sacrifice, not only of life, but of trust and hope. As we reflect on Wallace's legacy, we must confront the darker facets of power. Edward I, in his quest to maintain control over Scotland, employed brutality that only fortified the resolve of those he sought to subjugate. It is in this paradox that we see the enduring nature of the human spirit. The desire for freedom is innate, yet it is often met with oppressive force, revealing a timeless struggle that resonates through the ages. In the quiet moments before sleep, carry with you the story of William Wallace, a narrative woven from ambition, love, and the unyielding quest